All right, I'm here with Perry Woodin of Node40, and we're going to talk about some of the regulatory issues surrounding digital currencies, in particular Dash. How's it going, Perry?
Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So first, what exactly does Node40 do?
Well, we do a couple of things. We started off as essentially an infrastructure company hosting incentivized blockchain applications. So the first one was Dash. We host masternodes. So we've got an infrastructure side of the business, and then we ended up falling into the compliance end of the business. Part of the reason for that was our customers were paying us in Dash, and as a New York-based business, we wanted to make sure that we were complying with our tax jurisdiction, with the regulations here. So we had to figure out how to determine our income, gains, and losses. That ended up becoming another service that we are now providing to people who have Dash and soon to people who have Bitcoin. So the ability to do accounting, blockchain accounting, figure out your income, gains, losses, and then produce IRS tax forms.
Interesting. How common is even the concept of regulatory compliance in the average cryptocurrency holder's mind?
It seems to be changing. So I think that, say, 3 to 4 years ago, not a whole lot of people were concerned about it. Partially, it was because there were such low valuations on a number of these currencies. It was almost like having play money. But as the digital currencies started to attract more and more investment-minded individuals, they started to think about, well, what's going to happen to me if I convert this into fiat? I need to be able to report it. So we're seeing more and more interest in how do we report this? How do we stay above board? And that's particularly important for businesses who want to start accepting digital currency.
Interesting. Is it a common theme that you get some person who just was playing around with digital currencies, thought it was interesting, got some, all of a sudden they're sitting on a big pile of money, and now they start freaking out, not knowing what they're going to do if the government's coming after them? Do you get a lot of people who didn't plan it out from day one, who just came in, all of a sudden they're coming to you in a panic looking to find a way to be compliant?
Yeah, and that's a real theme, is not treating this stuff like a traditional asset. So when you get started, you're playing around with it a lot, and you may not form transactions that would be the best for a tax strategy. So you get a lot of people that would come to us and ask us, I have this wallet, it's a mess. How am I ever going to figure out what I owe in terms of tax liability? So there are a lot of questions that we can't answer because we're not accountants, and I always encourage people to talk to their accountant. But for the most part, if somebody just bought a bunch of digital currency and they're just sitting on it, there's nothing they have to worry about. If they're converting that into US dollars or some other fiat currency, putting that in their bank account, then they really need to start considering what is my tax strategy.
Do you ever get some clients who bought a lot of digital currency at one point, and at some point they're looking to cash out and they understand where that exit point is, but in the meantime they've spent this directly for goods and services, mostly as a novelty, and that's not as easily traceable, and now we get to the point where they're actually having to cash out and do tax reporting. Do you get a lot of people there confused onto, do the purchases matter since it's a commodity technically, etc.? Do you get a lot of that?
Yeah, I think people, once they start using the balance, our Node40 balance system for evaluating their Dash account, if they've made purchases in the past, I think some people are surprised to see that they had gains going back a year or two. Because like you said, they used it as sort of a novelty purchase. But then when you evaluate what those valuations were, what that particular cost of the transaction was, they may find that they've incurred a taxable event, because all of these transactions are considered transactions in property, and you have to pay a gain if you realize that gain.
Interesting. So I saw a post recently that you guys are now offering private send functionality, private send review in terms of calculating your balance. When did this come about?
Well, we knew when we started working on the accounting software that we were going to have to tackle private send at some point. Part of it was because, again, going back to when you're playing around with this stuff, when you first get into it, I had done this myself. You start playing around with all the features. And so I had a wallet that had private send in it, and there were transactions there. So we wanted to figure this out, at least for ourselves, and we knew this would be valuable for others that are using Dash. But yeah, we had to figure out a way to track the cost basis and the carrying basis of Dash private send transactions.
Yeah, that sounds like it must have been a big challenge because transactions get mixed from all over the network by masternodes. It's not quite as simple as like a coin tumbling service, and it seems like it's got to be a nightmare to track. I mean, how's that carried out?
Well, the user has their wallet. They know what transactions they've made. So in addition to knowing what transactions you've made, you have to know what public keys are associated with your wallet. So if you have those two pieces of information, it's possible to figure out when you're doing the mixing, what has come back to you, and then assign a cost basis to that.
Yeah, now does this mean that all of a sudden Dash's privacy is broken? You've kind of tracked it now?
No, not at all. So the privacy isn't broken at all. The only thing we're doing is taking the ability to assign cost basis to transactions. So this isn't the ability to then track where the rest of those, because you're mixing with 3 parties. So we don't have the ability to track where the rest of those Dash went.
So is the concept of digital currency as a whole, especially something like Dash with privacy features, is that compatible with regulatory compliance, or is that just kind of not even the point of using digital currencies?
Well, I think it is compatible with regulatory compliance. So you've got 2 options when you're dealing with digital currency. You can live in the digital currency world 100%. And for people who do that, they may say, well, I can avoid having to deal with compliance because I'm never in the fiat world, which is where compliance takes place. But for most of us who are living in a world where we're still transacting day to day in, say, US dollars, if we're using digital currency, we may be converting to US dollars. So should that be the case, you want to make sure that you're complying with all the regulatory statutes in your jurisdiction. And if you're going to do that, then you may as well start tracking all of your transactions, because this is a public blockchain, so we can just figure out what all of those transactions are for your particular wallet, and then you can be above board.
So if this is all compatible with regulation in general, do you think that current regulation makes it so that it's not exactly the most efficient to be used on the system? Like you mentioned, people who live their lives entirely digitally and don't really interact into the current fiat currency world at all. So do you think that in the future there'll have to be a restructuring of regulations to sort of account for people who never touch fiat currencies, who just live entirely in the digital world?
Yeah, it seems like there would be an attempt to regulate people who are just living in fiat, but I don't know how that's going to happen. It would just be pure speculation. If you're living that world, if you can live purely on digital currency, then you're essentially living off the grid. It's the same as people who are using cash right now. They're able to live off the grid.
So if you got someone who, as a novelty, just sort of bought and sold Bitcoin, Dash, a bunch of other cryptocurrencies for cash, held on to them, played around with them, and then before they know it, they just ended up having that being worth a whole lot, and now they have nowhere to go. They have no idea what to do next, right? They know the only thing they know is that they don't want to be in this gray area where they're susceptible to a possible IRS audit, and they want to have that peace of mind. What's the first step they should take?
Yeah, get your wallets in order. So if you're in cryptocurrency, I'm assuming most of us have multiple wallets. We probably aren't very careful with labeling our transactions, but your first step is really to get your house in order. So make sure that all of your wallets have proper labels on the transactions. Make sure you're using wallets where you can export the transactions. Once you can export those transactions, it's possible to create a history and figure out what your income, losses, and gains are.
Yeah, how difficult is it then if you have users who used a bunch of wallets before, maybe on mobile devices, for example, or older computers, and then do the proverbial throw the thumb drive in the landfill with all the Bitcoins on them? And so all their previous cryptocurrency transactions aren't really accessible except for whatever remaining funds they might have moved to a new wallet. So you got the new wallet, you know where it came from to that new wallet, but everything in the back, they can only kind of guess via what's on the blockchain where that went together.
Yeah, I think that's like people who come into their accountant with a shoebox full of receipts and they say, I lost the other shoebox. So at some point you need to figure out, what are you going to assign? What are you going to assign that's fair, so that you're not throwing up any flags?
Interesting. And how do masternodes figure into this whole equation? How are they defined as far as a regulatory reason, right? How are they? What's their category, and how do people tend to manage their masternode earnings and collateral in terms of regulation?
Yeah, I don't know how most people do it. I think if you were to take a random selection of masternodes off the network and take a look at the blockchain, you'd see that a lot of people remove the rewards periodically. So the rewards that you're getting from the network, those are considered ordinary income. So you need to report those as ordinary income. Then once you move those from your masternode, that's technically a taxable event. But I suppose you could make the argument that if you're moving it from the masternode to a wallet that you already own, you're not incurring a taxable event. You're just moving the asset from, like moving change from one pocket to the next, right? It's not a change in any sort of value. You haven't realized anything at that point. But that means that you need the ability to fudge the numbers. So if a reward came in, and let's say a masternode reward came in and it was $10, and by the time you moved it, it was $20. Well, you want to make sure that when you moved it to the other wallet, you can still set that value as $10. Otherwise, it's going to affect the realized gains going forward.
Yeah, so everything's calculated against gains and losses, right? So if you have a $10 reward that goes in, and then it goes to $20 when you move it, and then it goes back down to like $7 or something during that time period. And as long as you haven't lost control of the funds during that time, as long as you haven't bought and sold something or traded in the meantime, then that's the gain it's only the point of exit then?
Yeah, so it's only when you realize that gain or loss that's something that you would need to report. So you're going to report that as income because that's something that was new. You receive that as income. And then once you change that into something else, say Bitcoin or US dollars, that's where you have a realized gain or a realized loss.
All right. This has been very, very helpful and very interesting. Thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
No problem.